Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about the Wheel of Time. Yes, it's back to the grind. We're starting to talk about the Shadow Rising today, and this is just the first 5 chapters, I think. There's no prologue, so this is chapter 1 to 5. I hope. I think the last one that I read was Doorways, maybe, but the first two are like super long, so it's probably that one or the one after that. I'll yeah, I'm kind of confused there. I think it's the first 5 chapters. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get started, shall we? Well, cheers. All right, first things first. The Shadow Rising, book 4 of the Wheel of Time, is much longer than the previous books. Like in the audiobook, it's like 41 hours and a bit. That's a lot of time compared to some of the others. Like the longest one so far is Eye of the World. That was like less than 30 hours. So we're increasing that. And I have decided to not hammer through the entire book in 1 week. That would be possible, but I don't think that would be healthy for anyone. So I'm going to spread this out into like 8 episodes, I think. So we'll do 4 this week and 4 next week. I'm going to try to take a break on, like, say, Wednesday. Wednesday for me, depending on how long this will take to edit, like 1 day after that for you. We will see. However, I think there's still enough to talk about, and, well, I guess the videos will be a bit shorter, and probably y'all will be very, very thankful for that, because, you know, who wants to listen to me ramble and rage about Wheel of Time for 40 minutes? I certainly don't want to. Anyway, so let's look at this, the start of this. I've heard that this is sort of where Wheel of Time becomes its own. The structure changes. We're no longer going the same kind of structure that we had in the first 3 novels, which is go somewhere, then suddenly, out of nowhere, jump to the other end of the map to have a showdown that didn't make any sense whatsoever. So I'm looking forward to find out if this is the case, and we're suddenly in a really wonderful fantasy series that I can actually appreciate. I have my doubts, but I am willing to be, you know, surprised, positively surprised. We will see. The first chapter that I've read today did not make me, make me very hopeful, though. I'll say that. It's not the worst part of Wheel of Time that I've read so far. Far from it. There's some actually really well done stuff here that I personally appreciated. And I'll start with that, I guess. Alright, so, that first chapter has a very interesting structure, and I do like it. I have forgotten the name of the chapter, but who cares? First of all, it's not a prologue, but then again, the prologues of book 1 and not book 1, but like the previous prologues of Great Hunt and Dragon Reborn didn't feel that much like prologues and more like general first chapters anyway. So who cares? It's just a name, isn't it? And it's kind of 4 parts or sort of like that. But the major bit of this one is about establishing a new threat level, so to speak. And I like that. It's like, it does the same thing that annoys me every single time, and that obviously is that we start the book with something new has broken out, and now we have to face that new threat thing that was not introduced before, not even hinted at before. So it doesn't feel like Robert Jordan had all of that already in mind when he started out writing it. But then again, maybe he did and he just forgot to, put it in or whatever. Who knows? And I personally appreciate that this time he takes a lot of time to set this up, and that's sort of what I enjoyed about this. It's still not perfect, as I said, but it is done well. And that is that now weird magic stuff happens. The miasma of the Dark One has escaped. So there's like these random dangerous magical events happening, especially to our three male main characters. Um, Stuff attacking them in a way. And I like the way this is set up. So we start out with Perrin, and the axe is starting to attack him, and he wrestles it down. And we have Mat doing his gambling thing, and then the cards attack him, and he has that. And then we finally have Rand, and these reflections of Rand coming out of the mirror attacking him and so forth. You know what? That was done fairly well. That is competently starting out again, giving us a first view at all of our three main characters, or our three ta'veren dudes that are sort of the threefold hero, basically, or whatever we want to call it here. But that was just done well. It's each of them, the way they were set up was sort of, at least for Perrin and Mat. I still think that Rand is the weakest character in that whole group. But at least for Rand and for Perrin and Mat, the setup was decent, right? We have Perrin in his conversation with, what's her name? Faile Zareen? That's her name? Yeah, right. And then the axe, we have a callback to the whole hammer versus axe thing that was done before, and that he wants to be a smith or a pacifist and doesn't want to fight. He is very much a committed, loyal kind of character here. All of that was handled well. I mean, by gosh, Robert Jordan can actually write sort of well. The personal, the interpersonal thing, relationship thing, whatever you want to call it, with Perrin and Faile is still sort of awkward, but not too bad in this one. So I can even forgive him that bit, right? So that part is well done. So even if we have, forgotten a lot of stuff from The Dragon Reborn, because, it was published a year ago, and it was a year ago when we read that, when it first came out, you know what I mean? We were drawn back fairly quickly into, the whole thing, without it being a really, full-on, recap of what happened before. So, as I said, I'm willing to, praise Robert Jordan where praise is deserved, at least from my point of view. And this one is just done really well. It's not a literary masterpiece, but I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting competently written fantasy. And that first part is competently written fantasy about Perrin. Then we move to Mat, and we have Mat established as a gambler. He's gambling with those rich people in Tyr, and that part is also done well, for what it's worth, right? Mat is established as, with his superpower of the weird luck thing. We see that. It happens, he plays there, we see him sort of as the kind of happy-go-lucky character that he's supposed to be. He talks about women, he's drinking wine, he's enjoying himself, and so forth. That part is also established, it also establishes Mat as a character in a fairly, competent way. I, once again, appreciate that. I do personally prefer Perrin as a character to Mat as a character, and the other thing there is that where Perrin and Faile's conversation is just a bit of an awkward relationship thing that, is often very awkward, whether it's written well or not, because they're still kids in a way. At least, Perrin is very much a kid. So I get that bit, and that makes a lot of sense. And I might cringe while reading it, but that's not so much because Robert Jordan is not good at writing it, or he's not, a master, but it's also because, yeah, I recognize my behavior there as well when I was a kid, right? So I get that. Sure, works. With Mat, however, we have those Tyrene lords who are all absolute assholes. And that is obviously also part of what that scene is supposed to establish, right? Is to show the situation in Tyr and how Tyr is strictly ruled by these lords, those privileged fuckers that basically suppress and oppress the commoners. That's hinted at with that idea that Mat has the ear of Rand, the Dragon Reborn, and could maybe convince him that allowing commoners to charge lords in front of the magistrate is not a good idea for a law, which, you know, sets up that part of Tyrene society in a way. Plus, all of them are like, you know, young, rich, tend to seek, you know, sexual gratification where they can, which is usually by abusing their privilege and power and just basically going out and raping village girls. The way that is portrayed is unfortunately rather crudely. Once again, it is basically done well. It's just that Robert Jordan, for reasons that I can't fully fathom, is fairly limited and has this weird, as I call it prudish before, like this weird way when he has to talk about sexuality, where he just, I mean, it may be part of the time this was written in. I mean, this is written in like 1992, I think, probably 1992, and I mean, Game of Thrones comes out in 1994, and that's sort of when, like, using, you know, saying fuck is totally okay. Here, it is apparently not, and I suspect that's also because of Robert Jordan being Robert Jordan, right? When he talks about sexual violence or sexual things in general, he uses a weirdly cringy, innocent vocabulary, and that takes away part of the sting of like what he's trying to portray here. At least for me, it does. But that may also be that, you know, at this point in time, after like 20 years of grimdark fantasy being like the mainstay of fantasy, sort of. We're used to a much harsher or more direct portrayal of these kind of things. So I'm not fully blaming Robert Jordan. I'm just saying that's something that makes me roll my eyes while reading it, basically, sort of. So apart from that, that part is all that second part of the trilogy of entry scenes, or whatever you want to call it, is also done well. I do once again appreciate the way it is set up, because it manages to showcase Matt as a character. I still find the whole luck thing ridiculous, but that's probably just me and not exactly, you know, Robert Jordan's fault. I just don't buy it. Anyway, but it kind of sets up the situation in Tyr, the political situation or society in Tyr in a way, so I'm fine with that. That's well done once again. And then we jump to Rand, and Rand is having weird prophetic dreams about Min and what's her name? Elaine. And yes, I know that there was another part before that entire like Matt, whatever, Rand and whatnot thing, and that's the first chapter that I haven't spoken about. The one I'm talking about right now is obviously chapter 2, Whirlpools of Whirlpools of Fate, or Whirlpools of the Weave, or whatever, that one. But I wanted to look at that one because I feel it's actually the better introduction, sort of, to bring us back. And chapter 1 does have some other aspects that we need to talk about as well. However, Rand being the guy who is talking with the first of Mayane, whose name I have forgotten again, because who cares? I mean, sort of. Anyway, that scene is weird. So we have that weird prophetic kind of dream, or whatever, wet dream. Side note, it is really funny, because I know what Robert Jordan is trying to tell. It's like he's turning in his sleep, and he's obviously sweating because it's not exactly a nightmare, but it's kind of like a weird dream. So, and it's obviously also super warm in Tyr. So, yeah, he's sweating in his bed and turning around, and he has that dream about Min and Elaine pulling off their clothes and jumping into the lake. And then Robert Jordan just keeps writing on that that Rand turns around in search for a dry part of his bed, and I'm a dirty person, but man, if you didn't want to make a wet dream joke there, Bobby J, I'm sorry, you definitely failed. That was just ridiculous. However, then obviously the first of Mayane comes in and tries to seduce Rand, and that's where things get weird again, and like really weird. Because, one, it becomes extremely gratuitous. The way she's described, losing all her clothes, it becomes gratuitous. It does not really work that well, because whatever. I mean, not what work that well, but the problem that I have with it is the way it is described. It makes it very clear that her trying to seduce him is morally wrong, which may give us a larger hint, at Robert Jordan's sexual morality than anything else. And then making sure that once he used his magic to bind her and like tie her up and whatnot, it becomes weirdly bondagey in a way, kinky. But it still uses that weird sort of almost innocent vocabulary where, like, I don't know. He doesn't. He will never use tits or boobs or anything like that. He just stays in his weird, like, kind of harmless vocabulary to describe a sort of kinky scene. I'm like, that's weird, man. And then obviously those characters attack, and like his other selves attack, and we have that whole scene, which is once again cool. It just manages to set up Rand once again as not exactly the most interesting character. So I feel like the first two of that triplet, Perrin and Mat, are introduced way better in a way. Works much better for me. So yeah. And then we obviously have like a fight with Moiraine, about him sitting there and trying to, that whole old conflict of him trying to be himself and not being steered by the Aes Sedai, and maybe going too far or not far enough. That's sort of where we'll come back to in a bit. Now let me jump back to the prologue, which does actually work more as a prologue than, some of the stuff that we had before, which starts with Min showing up at the White Tower, and there's weird things going on there. Because on the one hand, we get like a bit of a re-establishing of Tar Valon. And this is something that I have, I will come back to it in a second again. It's something that I feel is a general problem of Robert Jordan. It's like every time he starts a new book, he kind of makes adjustments to the world. Stuff that he didn't do before, right? And this time around, it's like how even in Tar Valon, people are afraid of the Aes Sedai and don't trust them, and are, afraid of the Aes Sedai and don't trust them. Basically, even though the Aes Sedai rule that city. And that was not the case before. And he just changed that part of how the city works. So it feels like he realized that he wants to make a point of like how having the power and whatnot sets the Aes Sedai apart everywhere. Not only outside of Tar Valon, but everywhere. And so he introduces that aspect here and makes a point of mentioning it that he didn't mention before. And that's something that I personally don't, it kind of irks me. It's not a, full-on showstopper or anything for me, because other authors do the same kind of thing, and I understand it. It just irks me because it happens every single time. And then Min obviously walks in and talks to people and has her visions. We also get more information about like how her visions work, because apparently she can tell sometimes actually explicit things and sometimes not. And sometimes she can even tell times and whatnot, and she foresees a huge attack on the White Tower that a lot of people will die for. Well, it's not exactly something that interests me, but, that's sort of how that works. Now, the argument that you could make in this case is that has always been there, but this is the first time we actually get Min, or the second time we get Min as a point of view character. We had her near the end of The Great Hunt for once, right? When she jumps into bed with Rand. That's sort of the first time we get that situation. And thus, it is the first time we actually get her point of view when it comes to, like, foreseeing the future kind of thing. So, it could have always been that way, just never mentioned because we never got her perspective. That's the argument you could make if you want to defend Robert Jordan. Or it's once again that he needs to change the power or the way the power works because he wants to do something, in this case, give something more of a, foreshadowing for attack or for an attack. So he adds aspects to Min's power that weren't there before. I think it's like, depends on like how, positive you want to interpret that whole thing. And I don't care either way, but I just wanted to point out that both interpretations I think are possible, and that's sort of the thing there. However, what is interesting in that part? Well, not much more. It's like, apparently, the White Cloaks are around the city, all that stuff. Min meets with Gavin, whatever. Let's just hope Gavin will never actually meet the Green Man. That's all I'm saying here. Because then heads are gonna roll. There's some interesting foreshadowings here as well with Gawain. Min seeing Gawain with, the sword, the Heron sword over him as a swordmaster, and his banner, but his banner is not red with the charging bull, but green. And, what could that possibly mean? If we have the addition that, say, Egwene has made generally ideas that she will become Green Ajah, will that mean that Egwene will become Green Ajah and Gawain will become her? Gavin will become her warder and probably marry her, and thus change his banner to like green to reflect that? A wild guess. And no, I have not looked at spoilers. That's just me claiming that that's what will happen. Because once Robert Jordan gets to foreshadowing stuff, he's remarkably unsubtle. I mean, not that that's surprising because, he's never been like the subtlest of writers so far. But yeah. Anyway, there's also, I don't know, they're like, I'll get to that in a bit. Anyway, and yes, she talks to the Amyrlin, and the Amyrlin is like, I'll just use you to hunt out Black Ajah in the tower. And Min has like no choice, but she gets turned into a woman more and more. And I'll wait how that will turn out in the near future before I make a full-on argument on whether this is a problem or not. Right now, it's just that she has to change her appearance, and luckily she was the only one with actual dress sense before, which was like, wearing pants and having short hair and whatnot. It kind of now she has to wear long hair and skirts and shit, so no one will recognize her, because that's how that works, obviously. We get a hint that Elaida is doing Elaida things and suspecting worse things. I do see some potential there with Elaida. It seems so far, we never know, but it seems so far that Elaida is not Black Ajah, which is good. I would have hated her to be Black Ajah. That would have sucked. Seems right now she's not Black Ajah. She's actually trying to do the right thing and is probably suspecting the Amyrlin to do something terrible. So there is potential for drama, but we'll have to wait and see how that works out. But getting Elaida's perspective is actually interesting here. So once again, I appreciate that part. Then we come to the unavoidable, I think it seems unavoidable situation, which is the anti-Semitism. It's back there. Everyone's favorite big nose man, Padan Fain, who is now calling himself Mordeth. You know what I mean, right? So he is there with Dane Bornholm and Bayar, and crossing on his way to cross into the two rivers to do what he said he would do, which is destroy the two rivers and take revenge to draw out Rand. That's sort of what we see starting here. Yeah, I don't know. Once again, it is why always his fucking nose. It's like, yeah, it'll remain there until the end, and apparently, I'll still call it an anti-Semitic stereotype to make sure that the peddler and trader and traitor has this huge nose and other stereotypes of yes, anti-Semitic stereotypes. It's something that I still hate. Oh, and so we know that he's evil, as if we didn't know before. They kill the dogs of the Tinkers, which now it's personal, and also apparently a bunch of the Tuathon. Why they are here at the same bridge or Ton Ferry, who the fuck knows, who the fuck cares? But that's sort of what we see there as well, right? This is just to make sure that we know that everything is going to be bad down there. So yeah, I found chapter 2 way more interesting. This one just shows a bunch of potential threats and shit. So yeah, well, whatever. We'll see where this will be going in the near future, but apparently there's threats to the Amyrlin seat, to the White Tower, and threats to the homeland, so this will get very personal relatively soon. Now let's look at the girls, because we haven't spoken about the girls. They come up in chapter 3, and then it gets, or is it 4, whatever. I think chapter 4, actually, mostly. We see they're up to their usual stuff, which is Egwene and Nynaeve are feuding because of whatever reason, because, it's still, I get the point behind it, it just doesn't really come across as that cool. And they are questioning the 2 Black Ajah they captured at the end of The Dragon Reborn. And there's another issue that I have. Amiko, one of them, got stilled, stilled and can't touch the power. And it's just dropped, it's mentioned today, just dropped as, yeah, that happened. And I kind of see where it probably happened, and that Egwene did it by accident when she, went into the dream world and did the dream things there. I just think it is bad writing on Robert Jordan's part to not make any hint in The Dragon Reborn. I'll just state that here. It's yes, because we see Amiko, and we see other people capturing Amiko in Book 2, and if at that point she was absolutely separated from the power, because it was sort of done when she kind of flickered into sleep or out of sleep, so I guess that's sort of how that happened. If it is that traumatic, she probably would have said something in those scenes. It would have been so easy to have when Matt comes down there and frees Egwene and what her name, Nynaeve and Elaine, and they kind of tie up Amiko. It would have been so easy to mention something about that she was still there, and he just doesn't do it. So it adds to that, okay, I need to put it in now kind of thing, so I'll just mention it now, and hopefully no one will ever notice that I didn't actually make note of it earlier. Does it have to be that way? No, but Robert Jordan, being the unsubtle hack that he has been so far, does not strike me as someone who did that on, leave subtle hints for some reason or whatever. No, he probably forgot to put it in, and then realized that it's important right now that you have one person stilled, so he can probably do something with that fact later on, ideally. So yeah, that whole conversation there is you have the same fucking arguments again, and they don't learn everything. We just find out that there's 2 options. They get told 2 stories. One of them is run off to Tanjiko to do something there. One is, the other story of there will be more war. And we have sort of the setup here right now, I feel, is we have all these options because in the coming chapters, everyone will have to move somewhere. And since no one in that fucking group of Emond's Fielders and around them is able to make up their mind, as Moiraine rightfully claims and points out, someone has to make up their mind for them, or events will have to just kick them over, because no one in that group ever acts, actually. Matt doesn't act, Rand doesn't act, Perrin doesn't do anything, the girls just argue, nothing happens. So we need to wait for either Moiraine to just send off the Black Ajah to the White Tower, or something else to happen for it to actually finally start. And then we will see where all of these things will go. There will be war, because, there are several Forsaken loose, so someone has to do something about it. And the plan right now is to send Rand to attack Ilion with the Tyrene and do that kind of stuff, and send the girls to Tanjiko to do whatever there, and so forth. That's a good setup for the next part of the book. It's sort of what I expect to happen in the next couple of chapters, is to see how those, global things start out, and to kind of split up the party again into all kinds of aspects, which, I'm fine with that. Now, let's look at something else. And that is, once again, sexuality, female sexuality in particular. So here's a bunch of things. One of them is how more promiscuous, or more, not even promiscuous, like more extroverted, like, sexuality is constantly bashed down, right? So Min is supposed to be someone else in the tower. I'm not going to draw comparisons here. So she's supposed to be someone hiding in the tower from two suitors whom she has egged on too long, so she has to hide from them. And that's fucking toxic. That's absolutely fucking toxic, because basically, I know it's only an excuse to hide her there, and it's a story, but still, basically what you're saying is that it's totally possible for women to hide from overly aggressive partners, which, yes, that part I'm fine with. But the story is that she led them on so long that they started to become that way. It places the blame on the woman again. And that's where I have the problem, where I would say this is a fucking toxic narrative. Alright, next part of this. Every single fucking time it comes to, people kind of falling in love, or at least getting a crush on someone else, they're always talking about fucking marriage. It's only marriage. The idea of just having a relationship, starting a relationship, whatever, is never mentioned. Yes, there is these sort of affairs or whatever, the flirting that Matt seems to do, but apart from which is also kinda suspect. But the only proper form for love is absolutely fucking marriage every single time. And that stuff gets decided by apparently the women, who just bargain that stuff out. When we have Elaine and Egwene talk that out, it's like, yeah, we make those decisions for Rand, and then the men will follow. That whole setup is, once again, toxic as fuck. Plus, the idea they look down on the first of Mayan, whose name I've forgotten, and everyone, since she is obviously sort of a more sexual person and is not hiding that fact, every other woman is immediately thinking of her as immediately slut-shaming her. Fael is doing it. Egwene is doing it. Elaine is doing it even more. Rand is kind of doing it. And I'm like, is that necessary? Because I know what you're trying to do here, in a way. I know what Robert Jordan is trying to do, but he goes about it in such a toxic way that it once again makes me very, very angry. It's like, I don't know. It's unnecessary and makes me angry. And I just really feel that this will continue. I hope it won't. I hope he'll just sort this stuff out. I mean, the question is why does he include that aspect if Robert Jordan is obviously uncomfortable with sexuality in his story? He also uses a lot of vocabulary that is way more young adult than anything else. If he does all of that, why does he include a character or scenes like that, which are ridiculously about, sexuality? And he doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it. So he just goes and, I don't know, makes me angry. So I'll certainly keep an eye on that, because that's sort of where we'll start tomorrow, is when Egwene and Elaine sort out the relationship status with Rand. I think. How that will work out is something we'll find out tomorrow. So until then, have a great Monday or Tuesday, depending on when I'll finally upload this. And I'll talk to you tomorrow, and we'll see where this will go. So until then, cheers.